They said my brother's wedding would finally bring our family together. My father called 2 weeks before and said, "Claire, this time, you'll feel included." I believed him. I wired him $25,000 to help make it special. I booked their flights, arranged hotel suites, made sure every detail looked perfect, like the Donovans were still the respectable family people used to whisper about in Charleston society. The morning of the wedding, I woke to a photo in the family group chat, my father, my mother, and my brother laughing under the blue sky of the Maldives. The caption read, "For successful people only." That was the moment something inside me broke, and something else woke up. I'm Claire Donovan. Or at least that's the name I used before I became someone my family never saw coming. I grew up the youngest in a family that spoke in expectations, not affection. My father, Richard Donovan, was the kind of man who measured love in achievements and attention in money. My brother Noah was his golden child, handsome, talkative, charismatic. My mother Janet was the quiet shadow who smiled at every lie and smoothed over every bruise. And me, I was the one who meant well. That's what they called me when I was a little too ambitious, a little too different, a little too much. When I was 20, I left home and never looked back. They didn't notice. My father was busy trying to rebuild his failed company, my mother was too exhausted to speak up, and Noah was floating from one job to another. No one asked where I went, so I stopped telling them. They didn't know I built a company from scratch. Clarion Analytics, a data firm that grew faster than any of us could have imagined. In 6 years, it was worth nearly $800 million. I never told them. I wanted to succeed quietly, maybe even secretly, because I knew if they ever saw what I'd become, they'd find a way to make it about them. When Noah announced his engagement to Emily, the daughter of an Atlanta investor, my father acted like it was his own victory. "Finally, the family will be seen again," he told me on the phone. His voice softened for the first time in years. "Claire, this wedding will heal us. It's time you come home." For a second, I believed him. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe the years of distance and disappointment would finally dissolve into something resembling love. When he said they were struggling to pay for travel and arrangements, I didn't hesitate. "I'll handle it," I said. And he didn't even pretend to refuse. I wired the money that night, $25,000, labeled simply as family fund. The week before the wedding, I flew home to help with last-minute preparations. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but my father's pride still filled every room. At dinner, he toasted Noah and said, "This family has always stood for excellence." Then he turned to me with a polite smile. "And Claire does something with computers, I think." The table laughed. I smiled too, because that's what I'd always done. That night, I lay awake in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of laughter downstairs. I told myself it didn't matter. That being part of it, even as a shadow, was better than being invisible. The day before the ceremony, my father texted me, "Flight changes. Don't worry. Big surprise tomorrow." I didn't think much of it. I spent the night organizing Noah's wedding gift, a small but thoughtful gesture, a framed childhood photo of us playing on the beach, a reminder of when we still loved each other without conditions. The next morning, I woke early to head to the airport. My phone buzzed. I expected a message from Dad confirming the new flight. Instead, it was a photo. My father, my mother, and Noah on a beach that was definitely not in Georgia. The Maldives. A caption. "For successful people only." I stared at it for a full minute before it hit me. The money. My $25,000. The family fund. They'd used it to fly themselves to paradise, leaving me behind like an afterthought. The first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was clear. A cold, sharp understanding that this was who they truly were and who I would never be again. I sat on the edge of my bed and laughed once quietly, like someone realizing the punchline came years too late. Then I opened my laptop. My reflection stared back from the black screen, steady, calm, dangerous. My whole life they'd called me the quiet one, the obedient one, the one who'd never fight back. They were right about the quiet part. but they were wrong about everything else. I wasn't going to scream or beg or chase them. I was going to do what I did best: analyze, calculate, and act. Some people fight with words, others with money. I fight with facts. They took my money to buy themselves a memory. I'd take their legacy and turn it into evidence. I closed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and whispered into the stillness of the room, "You think you left me behind. You have no idea what I've built." Outside, the Charleston sun was already rising, golden, merciless, and new. It felt like the start of something different. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the quiet before the truth decides to speak. The silence that morning was heavier than any noise I'd ever heard. No laughter, no music, no wedding bells, just the dull hum of the ceiling fan spinning above my bed. My phone was still glowing with the photo from last night, the one of my family smiling under palm trees in the Maldives. My father's tan skin, my mother's perfect posture, Noah's smug grin. They looked like a magazine ad for success. And I was the invisible caption underneath it all, funded by the daughter they forgot to invite. For 10 minutes, I didn't move. I just watched the sunlight crawl across the carpet, lighting up the old wallpaper I used to trace as a kid. The absurdity of it all finally hit me. I had bought their paradise. I had financed my own exclusion. $25,000 wasn't just a transfer, it was my final attempt to belong. By the time I stood up, I wasn't crying. I was calculating. I went downstairs. The house was empty, the suitcases gone. The air stale with the smell of last night's wine and disappointment. On the kitchen counter, there was a note written in my father's sharp, precise handwriting: "Change of plans. We'll see you soon. Enjoy your day. Dad, enjoy your day." The words echoed in my head as I folded the note in half and slipped it into my pocket. He always had a way of turning cruelty into courtesy. I poured a glass of water instead and sat at the table where my family had celebrated Noah's engagement months ago. Now, sitting in that same chair, I realized I'd spent years trying to earn my way into a family that only understood hierarchy, not love. I opened my laptop. I didn't plan to scroll or rage online. I planned to disappear just like they had, but in my own way. I logged into Clarion Analytics' private dashboard, the one no one outside my inner circle had ever seen. The company's numbers glowed across the screen: revenue projections, international partnerships, government contracts. Everything I had built quietly, deliberately. $800 million in valuation, and not a single Donovan knew about it. They thought I was the underachiever, the data girl. The one they could overlook until they needed a favor. I hovered the cursor over the transaction and whispered, "You shouldn't have touched my company." My phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. My brother had posted a video, the family at a long dinner table overlooking the ocean. Champagne glasses raised golden laughter. The caption read, "To family and to success." Something in me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was detached. That kind of clarity is dangerous, especially for someone who knows how to weaponize information. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The Charleston air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin like memory. I walked past the oak tree where Noah once pushed me off my bike at 8 years old. He'd laughed when I scraped my knees. My father laughed too. "Toughen up," he'd said. That's life. Maybe it was, but not mine anymore. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering column. I imagined a better kind of revenge. They didn't need to see me. They needed to feel me. They needed to wake up one day and realize their comfort had expired. Their control was revoked. Their arrogance turned into liability. I started the engine, the hum steady, reassuring. My reflection in the mirror wasn't the same woman who had begged for a family. She was sharper now, colder, but calm. On the drive back to the city, my phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. Just one line. "Hope you understand." It was all too complicated. I laughed out loud. Too complicated. That was her excuse for everything, for staying silent, for watching, for doing nothing. When I reached my apartment downtown, I went straight to my office and pulled up the family trust records I'd saved years ago. My father had always handled the paperwork, and none of us ever questioned it. But I'd always been curious, always quietly watching. There were dozens of transactions, some small, others suspiciously large. Payments labeled as family expenses routed through shell accounts. My heart didn't race, it steadied. Patterns always told stories, and I was very good at listening. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd already built a map in my mind, dates, transfers, beneficiaries. Every lie, every theft, it was all there. I took a deep breath and drafted a message to my lawyer, Marisol Chen. This time I hit send. As the email whooshed away, I whispered into the empty room, "You wanted to make it special, Dad." "I will." Outside, thunder rolled over the bay. A storm was coming, but for once I wasn't afraid of getting caught in it. The next morning, the world turned from storm to steam. Inside Clarion Analytics, the air smelled of fresh coffee and ambition. My employees didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. To them, I was the composed CEO, always one step ahead. I shut my glass office door, sat down at my desk, and opened the internal system. The familiar cascade of data lines and figures greeted me, a language I understood better than my own family. Every number told the truth. I began with the $25,000 transfer. From there, I traced every linked account over the last year. The numbers bloomed like veins on a screen. Patterns emerged: small withdrawals, then larger ones labeled under vague descriptors, consulting, travel, family expenses. They'd been siphoning money for months, probably assuming no one would notice. But they'd made one mistake: they used my company's funds. That made it personal. At exactly 8:17 a.m., my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded small, panicked. A few minutes later, my mother called. Her voice trembled. "Claire, please stop this. Your father's upset." I didn't answer. At noon, Marisol called. "The bank accounts are officially frozen," she said. "Your father's been flagged for corporate misuse. The media's moving fast." I leaned back in my chair, calm. "Let them wonder." "You're calm," she noted. "I'm effective," I replied. "This isn't about feelings anymore, Marisol. It's about procedure." That afternoon, the story broke online. A business outlet picked it up first, Charleston Financier, under investigation for corporate misuse. Then Forbes reposted it. The comments flooded in poetic justice. "For successful people only, huh? Guess karma doesn't need a visa to visit the Maldives." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt steady, like the world had finally tilted back into place. My phone rang again. Noah. I let it ring twice before answering. "What the hell did you do, Claire?" His voice was raw, angry. "Good afternoon to you too," I said. "You've ruined everything. Dad's losing his investors. You think this is justice? This is betrayal." I leaned back, calm. "Betrayal," I repeated. Funny word coming from a man who used my money to pay for his honeymoon. He went quiet, then hissed, "You think you're so righteous? You're just jealous. You've always been jealous." "Jealous," I said softly. "Of what? Being your father's puppet, living off lies. I built something real, Noah. You just borrowed names and broke promises." "You'll regret this," he spat. "I already did," I said. "Years ago." I hung up before he could answer. By the time the first thunder cracked that night, the family fraud hashtag had gone viral. Every post, every article, every meme, all of it painted the Donovans as the cautionary tale they were. Still, I didn't post or comment. My silence said more than any headline could. That evening, I sat in the dark, the glow of my phone screen illuminating the last message from my father, "You're destroying this family." I typed back but deleted every word until only one sentence remained. "You did that yourself." Before bed, I opened my laptop one last time. The accounts were locked, the investigation rolling, and the Donovans were finally accountable to someone other than themselves. As I shut down the screen, thunder cracked outside loud enough to rattle the glass. I smiled. "Justice will be loud," I whispered, "and it will be legal." At that moment, I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the storm they didn't see coming. The next morning, the world turned from storm to steam. Inside Clarion Analytics, The air smelled of fresh coffee and ambition. My employees didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. To them, I was the composed CEO, always one step ahead. I shut my glass office door and began with the $25,000 transfer. I traced every linked account, watching the numbers bloom like veins on a screen. Patterns emerged: fake vendor names, non-existent services, all tied to my father's company, Richard Donovan Holdings. They'd been siphoning money for months, probably assuming no one would notice. But they'd made one mistake: they used my company's funds. That made it personal. At 8:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. My father, Richard, his voice a frantic bark. "What did you do?" "The company accounts are frozen." I leaned back in my chair, letting his panic wash over me. "I didn't do anything, Dad." "Maybe you should ask your accountant." "You're ruining this family," he snapped. "You did that yourself," I replied and hung up. A few minutes later, my mother called, her voice trembling. "Claire, sweetheart, please stop this. Your father's upset. Can't we just talk?" "You had your chance to talk," I said quietly, "but you chose silence. Now the law will do the talking for you." Her breath hitched. "We just wanted to make things right for Noah's wedding. You've always been so strong." "Stop," I cut her off. "You don't get to use love as a disguise anymore." She had no words. I hung up. Then came Noah. His voice was raw with anger. "What the hell did you do, Claire? You've ruined everything." "Betrayal?" I repeated. Funny word coming from a man who used my money to pay for his honeymoon. "You're just jealous," he hissed. "Jealous," I said softly. "Of what? Living off lies. I built something real, Noah. You just borrowed names and broke promises." He went silent. I hung up before he could answer. By noon, Marisol called to confirm the asset freeze was official. "Their primary accounts are locked," she said. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of that sink in. "Good," I said. "Let them feel what it's like to need something and be ignored." That afternoon, the media storm hit full force. The family fraud hashtag went viral. Every post, every article, every meme, all of it, painted the Donovans as the cautionary tale they were. Still, I didn't post or comment. My silence said more than any headline could. As I shut down my laptop that night, thunder cracked outside, loud enough to rattle the glass. I smiled. "Justice will be loud," I whispered, "and it will be legal." At that moment, I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the storm they didn't see coming. The headlines didn't die down, they multiplied. Every morning brought a new story, a new leak, a new crack in the Donovan image. What had once been whispers in Charleston boardrooms became public record. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was doing all the work for me. 3 days after the asset freeze, Marisol called. "You might want to sit down for this," she said, her voice lower than usual. "We found offshore accounts, not one, several. Cayman Islands, transfers dating back at least 8 years. I leaned against my desk, heart steady. "Whose name?" "Your brother's company. ND Ventures. But the real beneficiary isn't Noah." She paused. "It's your mother." The room went quiet. Even the hum of the office air felt distant. "My mother?" I repeated slowly. "Yes. Janet Donovan. Every major withdrawal routes to an account under her name. It's clean, too clean. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing." I sank into my chair, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. The woman who'd spent her life pretending weakness had been laundering money in secret. My mother, the soft one, the silent one, the peacemaker. Marisol continued. "We're preparing to file for international disclosure. But Claire, this changes everything. If she's involved, this isn't just corporate fraud. It's a conspiracy." I ended the call and sat in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there watching the city move beneath me, people going about their lives, unaware that mine had just tilted on its axis again. I opened my laptop and pulled the files. There it was. Janet D. Consulting, registered in the Cayman Islands 5 years ago. A modest import-export cover company. My stomach twisted when I recognized the signature on the founding documents, her cursive graceful and familiar. All these years she'd let me believe she was powerless. She'd played the victim while signing off on deceit. That night I called her. She answered on the second ring. "Claire," she said, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "Mom," I said quietly. "When were you planning to tell me you were the one holding the offshore accounts?" There was a long silence, then a shaky inhale. "You shouldn't have gone digging, sweetheart." I almost laughed. "That's your answer." "You don't understand, your father needed help. The company was collapsing. We had to protect what we could." I clenched the edge of my desk. "You protected yourself. You let me think I was the outsider while you hid everything with him." "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "I signed papers, yes, but I didn't know—" "Don't," I interrupted. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You just hoped no one would ever hold you accountable." Her breath hitched. "I did it for the family, Claire. For your future." "My future," I repeated. "You left me behind in it." The silence between us stretched thin and fragile. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered finally. "Then why does it keep happening?" I asked, my voice raw with a pain I couldn't hide. "Every time I tried to trust you, you let me down." "Why? Was it always this easy for you to just let me go?" She started to cry, her voice thick with regret. "You were the strong one, Claire. The one who could handle it. Your father was so fragile when his business started to fail. Noah was still finding his way. I thought I was holding us all together. I put the money away not for me, but to have something for all of us if everything else fell apart. You were the only one who didn't seem to need it. So you gave it to them instead." I said the truth of it, landing like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, and a single tear slid down her cheek. The unspoken apology in that one moment was more honest than any lie she'd ever told. "I didn't want you to grow up hating us." "It's too late for that," I said. I ended the call, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. I spent the next 2 hours staring at the data, searching for a reason to believe she'd been manipulated. But every transaction told the same story: complicity. She wasn't a pawn. She was a player. She had made a choice, and that choice had cost me my faith in her. The next morning, Marisol confirmed the findings. "We filed for asset seizure," she said. "All linked accounts under Janet D. Consulting are frozen." I thanked her and hung up. By noon, my father called again. His voice was no longer angry, it was broken. "Claire, you've dragged your own mother into this. Do you know what you've done?" "I didn't drag her anywhere," I said. "She walked in on her own." He exhaled heavily. "You think this is justice? You're tearing us apart." "No, Dad. I'm revealing what was already broken." I ended the call and let the phone drop onto the table. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the realization that my family had been lying to me for most of my life. That evening, the story hit Forbes. Offshore Empire: How the Donovans Hide Millions Overseas. My mother's name was right there, printed in bold. The article described her as a silent partner in an international tax scheme. I stared at it for a long time, tracing her name with my finger. Janet Donovan. My mother. When I was 10, she used to tell me that silence was strength, that keeping the peace meant keeping the family whole. I finally understood what she meant. Her peace was built on deceit. Her strength was the absence of truth. I poured myself a glass of water, too numb for wine. The apartment was quiet except for the faint buzz of my phone lighting up again, messages from reporters, lawyers, and strangers. But I didn't answer any of them. I stood by the window looking out at the night and whispered, "You were supposed to protect me, not become them." The reflection in the glass stared back, older, colder, sharper than before. The next day, Marisol called with one more revelation. "Claire," she said, "there's something else in the file. A transfer made 19 years ago from your father's personal account to Janet D. Consulting. Large. It references custody arrangement. Does that mean anything to you?" I frowned. "No," I said slowly. "It doesn't." "Maybe you should ask her," Marisol said gently. "This could go deeper than money." I hung up and sat in the silence that followed. My father's words, my mother's lies, my brother's arrogance. They all started to make a strange kind of sense. A custody arrangement. I opened the old family photo album on my shelf, running my hand over the faded pictures. My father held me as a baby. My mother was smiling beside him, but her eyes, now that I looked closer, seemed distant, almost cautious. For the first time, I wondered if the biggest lie wasn't about money at all. And deep down, I knew Marisol was right. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the part where the truth started costing blood. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house before the press could find them. The driveway was empty except for my mother's silver sedan. The curtains were drawn, the porch light still on, though the sun was already rising. It looked like the kind of house that had been pretending to sleep for a long time. I didn't knock. I just opened the door. The smell of lemon cleaner and perfume hit me immediately familiar, suffocating. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. The newspaper lay open in front of her. My father's face was on the front page under the headline, Donovan Empire Under Federal Investigation. She didn't look up when she said, "You should have called first." "I figured you'd hang up," I said. She flinched but didn't argue. I sat down across from her. Between us, the newspaper's edges fluttered in the air conditioning like the house itself was trying to speak. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. Her fingers tightened on the mug. "It wasn't my secret to tell." "Yes, it was," I said. "It was your signature, your account, your name." She stared at the coffee as if answers might be floating there. "You think I wanted this?" she asked finally. "I was protecting what little we had left. Protecting who I said. Dad. Noah, yourself." She looked up, then eyes wet but sharp. "All of us. You included." My laugh came out hollow. "You protected me by lying to me." Her voice cracked. "Your father made mistakes, Claire. Big ones. But You signed them." I cut her off. "That's not a mistake. That's a choice." She pressed her lips together, trembling slightly. "He said it was temporary. He said it was to keep the company afloat." I believed him. I shook my head. "You didn't just believe him. You obeyed him." Her eyes flicked to the newspaper again as if seeking forgiveness in print. "You don't understand what it's like to live with someone like him." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "I grew up in the same house. I just stopped pretending it was normal." Her silence stretched thin between us. I wanted her to fight back, to scream, to confess, but she just sat there shrinking further into herself. Finally, she whispered, "Your father wasn't always cruel." "Maybe not," I said. "But he was always good at convincing people he wasn't." She closed her eyes and a tear slid down her cheek. I hated how much it still hurt to see her cry. I hated that part of me wanted to comfort her. "Mom," I said softly, "Marisol found something. A transfer, 19 years ago, labeled custody arrangement." "What was that?" She froze. The color drained from her face. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Please." She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, "That money wasn't for custody. It was a payoff." My stomach twisted. A payoff for what? Her eyes darted away. "To keep things quiet. To make sure your father's reputation stays intact." About what the silence that followed was unbearable. When she finally looked at me again, her expression had changed. There was a kind of resignation in it, a surrender that made my skin crawl. "You were never supposed to know," she said softly. "Know what?" She swallowed hard. "Richard isn't your father." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. What I whispered. "He found out when you were 2, she said. "He agreed to raise you as his own, but only if I signed over certain rights. He said the truth would ruin everything." My throat tightened. "Who is my father?" Her eyes filled with tears. "His name was David Hale. He worked with me before I met your father. He was kind, brilliant. When I got pregnant, he wanted to be there, but Richard?" She stopped shaking her head. "He paid him to disappear." I felt the room tilt. The lemon cleaner smell suddenly made me nauseous. You lied to me my entire life. I tried to protect you, she said, reaching across the table. Richard would have taken you away from me if I told you. I stood up, chair scraping the tile. You let him use me as a pawn. You let him humiliate me, control me, erase me, and you said nothing. Her voice broke. I thought I could keep you safe. Safe from what I shouted. From love, from the truth, from myself. She flinched but didn't move. I didn't want you to grow up hating us. It's too late for that, I said. I turned to leave, but she called after me. Claire, please, he's sick. He's not the man he used to be. I stopped at the doorway, my voice steady but cold. No, Mom. He's exactly the man he's always been. You're just finally seeing it. When I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, the light harsher. My hands were shaking, but not from shock. This was clarity. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Marisol. DNA results ready. You should come by. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The truth wasn't done with me yet. I got into my car, started the engine, and whispered to myself, silence isn't peace. It's complicated. Then I drove toward the city, toward the one thing my family had never been able to bury proof. Marisol was waiting for me when I arrived. Her office lights were low, the blinds half closed. She didn't speak right away. She just slid a white envelope across the table. My name was written on it in her neat handwriting. This is it, she said quietly. The DNA results. My fingers hovered over the envelope. For a moment, I couldn't move. The weight of it was too much, too final. Everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change officially, scientifically, undeniably. Do you want me to open it? Marisol asked. I shook my head. No, I'll do it. I tore the flap open slowly, carefully, as if it might explode. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My eyes scanned the text until they found the only line that mattered: probability of paternity, Richard Donovan, 0%. It wasn't a shock I felt. It was a relief. Cold, quiet relief. Like the world had finally stopped lying to me. I exhaled, folded the paper and set it down. So my mother wasn't lying about that, I said. No, Marisol replied. She wasn't. David Hale. She nodded. Confirmed. He's alive. Retired. Living in Asheville. We verified through public records. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady myself. The name felt distant and close all at once. David Hale. A man who had wanted to stay. A man my mother let disappear. What do you want to do? Marisol asked gently. I want to meet him, I said. But not yet. She nodded understanding without asking why. As I left her office, the late afternoon sun hit my face. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt real. I walked to my car, the envelope still in my hand, the paper inside humming like a live wire. I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly through Charleston's narrow streets until I ended up by the harbor. The tide was high, the sky turning gold. I sat on a bench and watched the water move. It felt honest in a way people rarely were: constant, untamed, unforgiving. I thought about my childhood, about the nights my father would come home late and slam doors, about the way my mother would whisper, "Don't upset him." I remembered the feeling of never quite belonging, of sensing something was off, but never being allowed to ask why. Now I know. I'd been living someone else's version of the truth. I had spent my entire life trying to fit a mold that wasn't even mine, fighting for a name I didn't earn, and enduring a silence that wasn't my burden to carry. The anger I felt toward them, for the money, for the betrayal, felt small now. The real fraud was the lie about my identity. They didn't just steal my money. They stole my truth. By the next morning, the news had already broken. Somehow the DNA report had leaked. Maybe through the court filings, maybe through one of the investigators. I didn't care how. The headline was everywhere: Donovan Harris, not a biological daughter. My phone lit up with messages. Is it true? You okay? This changes everything. Noah called too, his voice raw with anger. You just can't stop, can you? First the money, now this. You're destroying us. I didn't destroy anything, I said calmly. I just stopped pretending. He cursed under his breath. You're not even one of us. That's the first honest thing you've ever said, I replied and hung up. By afternoon, the press had found my building. Photographers waited by the entrance, shouting questions. Claire, is Richard Donovan your father? How does it feel to find out you're not a Donovan? Are you going after inheritance? I didn't answer. I just kept walking. The truth didn't need me to defend it anymore. That evening, Marisol called again. Claire, you should see this, she said. Forbes just published a follow-up story. You're in it. I opened the link. Claire Hale, the woman who built herself twice. The article told my story, the betrayal, the investigation, the revelation. But it wasn't cruel. It was factual, even admiring. It ended with a single line that made my throat tighten. She didn't inherit her name. She created it. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't anger or grief. It was pride. Not the hollow kind my father loved, the real kind, the kind you earn alone. That night I sat at my desk and wrote a letter I didn't plan to send. Dear David Hale, I used to wonder why my father never loved me, why I never fit in. Now I understand it's because I was never his to love. I'm not angry at you. You stayed away because you had to. But I'd like to meet you someday, not as a daughter demanding answers, but as a woman who finally knows her own story. I folded the letter and set it beside the DNA report. 2 truths, side by side. 1 ending, 1 beginning. Later that week, Marisol arranged a quiet meeting with federal agents. They showed me new evidence, more offshore accounts, more signatures. Richard and Noah were facing charges of fraud and obstruction. My mother had been listed as a cooperative witness. When I left the meeting, the air outside felt lighter. Justice wasn't just closing in, it was already here. I walked to my car, the city alive around me, the night sky wide and endless. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I whispered to the wind, you stole my blood, my name, my place, but not my truth. Then I smiled, soft but sure. My name is Claire Hale, I said out loud to no one and everyone, and that's enough. The morning the truth hit the press, the world didn't explode. It exhaled. For years, my life had been noise, accusations, denials, headlines that screamed. But that morning, the paper simply said, DNA confirms Claire Hale, not a Donovan heir. No scandal, no sensationalism, just facts. The quiet was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. People asked if I felt vindicated. I didn't. Vindication still belonged to anger, and I was done with anger. What I felt was something deeper, something still. Peace, maybe, or the kind of emptiness that feels like the first step toward peace. Forbes updated their article the next day. Claire Hale, the woman who built herself twice. They used a photo of me at the Clarion headquarters, sunlight hitting my face through the glass. The caption read, Justice doesn't always roar. Messages poured in. Women I'd never met wrote to say my story gave them courage. One email read, You didn't destroy them. You educated them. Another said, That's not revenge, that's redemption. I didn't reply to any of them, but I read every word. Because they were right. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was a reclamation. A few weeks later, I sat in my new office, not the one that looked down on Charleston's business district, but a smaller one in an old restored brick building by the water. The sign outside read, The Legacy Foundation for Women in Crisis. The space still smelled of paint and fresh wood. Sunlight spilled over the boxes waiting to be unpacked. Marisol leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand. You really did it, she said. I smiled. You think I'd fight that hard for the truth, and then do nothing with it? She laughed softly. I knew you'd build something. I just didn't expect you'd make it this personal. It was always personal, I said. It just took me years to admit it. The foundation would help women who'd been silenced financially, emotionally, legally by the same kind of families and power structures that once crushed me. We'd fund legal aid mentorship and small business grants. I wasn't interested in vengeance anymore. I was interested in rebuilding. That afternoon, the first donation came in anonymously for $50,000. The note attached simply said, "From someone who knows what it's like to be forgotten." By evening, my inbox was full of volunteers' letters and messages from survivors who wanted to help. It felt like the world was moving forward with me. A week later, Forbes invited me to speak on their Women in Leadership panel. I hesitated, then agreed. The moderator asked the same question everyone did. "Claire, how did you find forgiveness after what your family did?" I looked out at the audience rows of women, some nodding, some crying quietly. I said I stopped chasing revenge when I realized the truth already did the work. Forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. There was silence, then applause. Not the loud kind, but the kind that builds like a wave, steady and full. Afterward, a young woman approached me backstage. She looked barely 20. Her voice shook as she said, "My mom used to tell me you have to forgive to survive." But I never believed her until now. I touched her hand and said, "Survival is just the first part. The rest is learning to live again." That night I went home and found an email waiting. The subject line read, "Thank you." The body of the message said only, "You saved me. My father's just like yours." I read it 3 times. Then I cried, not the broken kind, but the kind that feels like release. Later I poured myself a cup of tea and stood by the window. Charleston glowed beneath me, the lights reflected on the harbor. My reflection looked older, calmer, truer. They had tried to define me through blood money and silence. I had redefined myself through truth. The legal proceedings came to a tense and swift end. My father, Richard Donovan, appeared in court, his posture still straight, but his face a mask of defeat. He pled guilty to corporate fraud to avoid a lengthy public trial that would reveal every one of his lies. The judge sentenced him, and as he was led away, I watched a dynasty crumble in real time. Noah, my golden child brother, was charged with obstruction and tax evasion, a consequence he had no words for. He looked lost, a man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of sand, now watching it wash away with the tide. My mother, Janet, was also there. She walked to the witness stand and for the first time in her life spoke the truth out loud. Her testimony was tearful, quiet, and brutal in its honesty, a painful record of complicity and fear. And when she asked me to meet for coffee afterward, I went. We didn't talk about the past. She told me she was living in a small apartment near the water, volunteering at a shelter. Her eyes looked softer, her hands steadier. "I'm sorry, Claire," she said. "I know," I replied. For once it was enough. When I left, the sky was streaked with pink and gold, the kind of light that only comes after storms. I thought about the girl I used to be, desperate to belong, too scared to speak. And I thought about the woman I'd become, the one who didn't need to be chosen to have value. As I walked back to my car, I whispered, "Justice isn't revenge, it's a restoration." The next morning I woke up to another headline: The Legacy Foundation launches scholarship program for women entrepreneurs. Beneath it, my quote read, "When the truth costs you everything, build something that can't be bought." The comments were full of encouragement, not scandal. For the first time in years, my story wasn't about pain, it was about purpose. That night as I was closing my laptop, Evan texted me, "Forbes just called you the Quiet Revolution. Thought you'd like that." I smiled. They're learning. Outside, the city was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of being erased. It was the silence of peace. I looked out at the water and whispered to myself, "This is my legacy. Not revenge, not blood, truth that echoes." And for the first time, I believed it. They never tell you what happens after revenge. Nobody warns you about the silence. It doesn't roar or echo. It hums steady and low like a heartbeat. You're finally able to hear after years of chaos. I woke up one morning to that silent sunlight crawling across my bedroom floor, no phone buzzing, no reporters waiting outside. The investigation was over. The sentences had been read. The Donovans, what was left of them, had fallen. For the first time in my life, there was no fight left to win. I made coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the city waking up. For months, my life had been measured in court dates and headlines. Now there were no more enemies, only quiet. And quiet, I learned, is a strange thing. It can comfort you or confront you. Marisol called mid-morning. "It's officially closed," she said. "The final documents came through. Your father took a plea. Noah accepted full liability for the offshore accounts." I took a slow breath. "And my mother? She's been cleared of charges. Cooperation works miracles." I laughed softly. "Yeah, it does. Claire," she said carefully, "what will you do now?" "I don't know," I admitted. For years my purpose was surviving them. I never thought about what comes after. "Then maybe that's your next fight," she said gently. "Learning how to live." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle. I didn't turn to the Legacy Foundation vision for a new project to conquer. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, and for the first time in my adult life, baked a loaf of bread. The simple act of kneading dough, feeling the warmth and elasticity, grounded me. It was a tangible creation, something new built with my hands, not just with data and lawyers. That night I drove to my mother's apartment by the harbor. She'd invited me for dinner, something simple, she'd said. I almost didn't go, but something in me needed to see her not as a ghost from my past, but as a person trying to rebuild her own life. When I arrived, she was already waiting by the door, wearing an apron and a cautious smile. The place was small but warm. There were flowers on the table, candles flickering in mismatched holders. "I made lemon chicken," she said, hands trembling slightly as she served the plates. "It smells good," I said. For a while we ate in silence. Then she said, "I don't expect forgiveness, Claire, but I want you to know I see you now. I should have seen you sooner." I looked up, surprised by the softness in her voice. "You always saw me, Mom. You just didn't want to look." She nodded slowly. "You're right. I was afraid of losing everything, so I lost what mattered most instead." I studied her face, the fine lines that hadn't been there before. "You don't have to apologize anymore," I said quietly. "I already forgave you." Her eyes widened. "You did, yes. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. Carrying anger keeps me connected to everything I've already let go of." She started to cry, then silently. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold but steady. When dinner ended, we stood by the window together, watching the harbor lights flicker. "You always loved the water," she said softly. "I still do," I replied. "It reminds me that peace moves, it doesn't stay still." That night I walked along the boardwalk alone. The breeze was cool, salt-heavy. I thought about everything I'd lost: my family, my name, the version of myself that used to crave their approval. And I realized something: peace isn't free. It costs every piece of the anger you thought protected you. It costs your certainty, your story, your edge. I whispered to the waves, "This is the price, isn't it?" The next morning I was back at the foundation. The first recipients of our grant program were waiting in the lobby, 5 women, all from different cities, all with stories that felt too familiar. I shook each of their hands, looked them in the eyes, and told them the truth. No one had ever told me, "You are allowed to rebuild." Later, during the press announcement, someone asked, "What drives you now after everything?" I smiled and said, "Purpose," but with a soft heart. The cameras clicked flashes, bright and warm. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt present. That evening, Evan stopped by my office. He leaned against the doorframe with that easy half smile. "You look lighter," he said. "I feel it," I admitted. "It's strange. I thought peace would feel like nothing. But it's full of something I can't name." He nodded. "Maybe it's freedom. Maybe." He stepped closer, handed me a small envelope. "Something came for you at Forbes. They thought you'd want to see it." Inside was a formal letter: "You have been nominated for Forbes Woman of the Year." I looked up at him. "You're kidding." "Nope, it's real." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Funny, isn't it? I spent my whole life chasing their approval. Now it just arrived." "Because you stopped needing it," he said. When he left, I turned off the office lights and stood by the window, looking out over Charleston. The city glimmered like it had forgiven itself for being cruel. I whispered, "What you build from pain will outlast everything built from pride." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice anymore. It was balanced. I went home that night, wrote a letter to David Hale, the father I'd never met. "You gave me a name I didn't know I had," I wrote. "I hope I'm living it well." I signed it. Love, Claire Hale sealed it and placed it on my desk. The storm had passed, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next one. The world felt wide open, and for the first time I felt ready to walk through it. I'd spent years mastering control over my business, my emotions, my image. It was how I survived them. But control doesn't heal you. It only keeps the wounds sterile. It took me a long time to realize peace isn't the same thing as trust. Peace is solitude. Trust is surrender. And I had no idea how to do that. When Evan called one Sunday afternoon and asked to meet for coffee, my first instinct was to say no. The last time a man said we should talk, it ended with me losing a family. Still something in his voice, gentle, curious, unhurried, made me pause. "Just coffee?" I asked. "Just coffee," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. We met at a small cafe by the waterfront, a quiet place with chipped mugs and the smell of cinnamon. He was already there when I arrived, no notepad, no recorder, just 2 cups of coffee waiting between us. "I'm not interviewing you," he said quickly. "I promise." I smiled, though it felt foreign. "Good. I'm tired of being a headline." "You're more than one," he said softly. "You just haven't seen it yet." We talked for an hour, not about the investigation, not about the foundation, not even about the past. He asked about what I liked to read, what music I listened to when I couldn't sleep. Simple things. Safe things. The conversation flowed easily, almost suspiciously so. When I left, I realized something strange. My shoulders weren't tight. I hadn't been waiting for a trap. I'd just been. But that night, lying in bed, the doubts crept in. I replayed every sentence, every glance, every laugh. Was he pitying me? Curious, did he want a story or something else I hated that I still measured connection and risk? The next morning, I found a small brown envelope at my office. Inside was a book, The Architecture of Trust, with a note tucked inside the cover. "Thought you'd appreciate this. You build things beautifully, but even structures need windows. E." I ran my fingers over the handwriting. For a long time, I didn't move. Windows. They'd terrified me my entire life. Transparency was dangerous. Letting people see it meant giving them a way to break you. But for the first time, I wondered what if I'd been wrong that evening. I called him. "About the book," I said. "Thank you. Did you like it? I'm not finished." "Take your time," he said. "Good foundations take time too." Something in his tone, calm, unassuming, made me smile again. Over the next few weeks, we met often. Sometimes for lunch, sometimes just a walk along the harbor. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Savannah, about his mother's bookstore, about losing her too young. I told him about the ocean, how it always made me feel small in a good way. With each conversation, a new layer of my guarded world peeled away. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding back until I wasn't anymore. The simple act of telling him a story about a book I loved, a song I couldn't get out of my head, felt like building a tiny, fragile bridge. He never pushed. He just listened. And for a person who had spent her life being talked at, it was a revelation. One evening as we walked past the pier, he said quietly, "You know, you don't have to carry everything by yourself. I'm used to it." "I know," he said. "That's the problem." I didn't answer. The truth lodged in my throat like a stone. Later that night, I sat on my couch, watching the city lights flicker. I opened my journal for the first time in months and wrote, "Revenge gave me power. Forgiveness gave me peace. But maybe love will give me balance." The words startled me. I wasn't sure I believed them, but I wanted to. 2 weeks later, Evan came to one of the Foundation's events, a small charity dinner for new grant recipients. He stayed in the back, never trying to stand out. When he left, He pressed a note into my hand. "You built a home out of truth. Don't forget to live in it." I read it 3 times before tucking it into my purse. The next day he called. "You've been quiet," he said. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Trust people." "Start small," he said. "Trust the moments. The people come later." That stayed with me. But trust, like peace, always demands a test. Mine came the following week. It was late, nearly midnight, when I got the email. Notice new claim filed by Richard Donovan. Appeal for inheritance verdict submitted. For a second, the room went cold. My father, from whatever miserable corner he now occupied, was reaching back into my life one more time. I read the line again and again until the anger burned out of me. Then I laughed softly, almost tenderly. He was still trying to control me, even from a distance, but this time it wasn't working. I picked up my phone and texted Marisol. "Got the notice. Let's handle it tomorrow. Tonight I'm choosing quiet." Then I turned off the lights, sat by the window, and looked at the city, the same city that had once been full of ghosts. I even texted a few minutes later. "Still awake barely." I replied, "But I'm fine." He answered, "You always are. That's what I like about you." I hesitated before typing back. I don't want to be fine all the time. I just want to be real. There was a long pause before his reply came through. Then, "Start here." I put the phone down and exhaled. For once, I didn't overthink it. I didn't guard myself. I just let it be. Outside, the moon shimmered on the harbor, quiet and whole. Trust wasn't about blind faith. It was about learning to open the door again, even knowing the wind might come through. And that night, for the first time, I slept with the window open. The day I received the final court letter, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel triumph. It was something quieter, like hearing a song end on the right note. The appeal was denied. My father's last attempt to claim my inheritance, to twist the law in his favor, had failed. For the first time, there was nothing left for him to take. The world didn't stop. The city went on. But inside, something in me settled. Marisol called that afternoon. "It's over, Claire. Officially. No more filings, no more hearings." I closed my eyes. "Thank you. For everything." "You don't owe me thanks," she said. "You earned every bit of this." After we hung up, I sat in my office at the foundation, staring at the framed quote on my wall. "When the truth costs you everything, build something that can't be bought." The words used to sting. Now they steadied me. Outside, a warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the sound of gulls from the harbor. My staff was finishing up for the day, laughter echoing from the hall. They'd started calling the foundation's new outreach center the Haven. I liked that. It felt right, something safe built from what once destroyed me. I turned off my computer and walked down the hallway toward the glass doors. The light outside was honey gold, the kind that made everything look softer. Evan was waiting near the steps, hands in his pockets, smiling as easy as ever. "Congratulations," he said. "It's done." "It is," I replied. "Feels strange, like the ending of a book you never thought you'd finish." He chuckled. "Then maybe it's time to start a new one." We walked together toward the pier, the city quieting as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air smelled of salt and rain, familiar and forgiving. "You ever think about what would have happened if none of it had gone public?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "But I don't think I'd change anything. The truth needed light." He nodded. "You didn't just change your story, Claire. You changed theirs too." "I didn't mean to destroy them," I said softly. "I just stopped letting them define me." "That's what justice looks like sometimes," he said. We stopped at the edge of the dock. The water shimmered, catching the last traces of sunlight. He turned to me. "So what's next?" I looked out at the horizon. "Maybe I'll go see him." "Your father?" I shook my head. "No. David, the man who didn't get to raise me." He smiled. "You should." "I will. I think it's time." That night I packed a small bag and booked a ticket to Asheville. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to know who he was, not the ghost, not the mystery, but the man. The next morning, the drive was quiet, the roads winding through misty hills. The air grew cooler, cleaner, and calmer. By the time I reached the small cabin listed on the letter Marisol had found, my heart was steady. He opened the door before I could knock. White hair, kind eyes, a weathered face that somehow felt familiar. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You look like her." "So I've been told," I said. He smiled, faint but real. "Come in, Claire." The cabin smelled of cedar and old books. There were photos on the mantel mountains, a woman I didn't recognize, and one black and white photo of a baby. Me. "I kept that," he said quietly when he saw me looking. "She sent it before everything fell apart." We sat down at the small table by the window. The silence wasn't awkward. It was cautious, respectful. "I didn't know if I should come," I admitted. "I didn't know if you would," he said. "But I hoped." For hours we talked. About my mother. About the man he once was. About the night my father offered him money to disappear. He didn't take pride in it, but there was no bitterness in his voice either. Just acceptance. "I thought staying away would protect you," he said. Maybe that was cowardice. Maybe it was love. Sometimes they look the same. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that he wasn't who I expected. He wasn't a savior. He was human. And for once, that was enough. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. "Claire," he said, "you turned pain into purpose. That's not something I could have taught you. That's yours alone." Maybe I said, "But I think I needed to know where I came from to see who I really am." He smiled softly. "Then I'm glad you came." On the drive back, the sun broke through the clouds. The road stretched wide and endless before me. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd buried: the obedient daughter, the forgotten sister, the quiet woman who let others speak for her. And for the first time, I didn't mourn them. I thanked them. Every version of me had carried a piece of the truth here. When I got home, Evan was waiting outside my apartment. "How was it?" he asked. "Honest," I said. "And enough." He smiled. "That sounds like peace." I nodded. "It is." We stood there for a long moment, the city humming softly around us. Then he said, "Claire, if you ever tell your story again, tell them this part too. The part where you stopped fighting and started living." I smiled. "Maybe I will." The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I walked onto my balcony, the air cool and crisp. Below the city was still sleeping a grid of dark streets and quiet buildings. I looked at the dark windows of my apartment building, and then at the sky where the first hint of light was just beginning to appear. I opened my arms wide, a gesture of surrender and acceptance. This is my legacy. Not a story of revenge, but of a woman who was handed a life she didn't choose and had the courage to create her own. A story about finding your family not by blood, but by purpose. And as the sun rose, I raised my chin to the new day, no longer needing to look back. I had left the past behind. I had found my truth. The quietest revenge of all isn't revenge at all. It's thriving where they thought you'd fall.